out loud because they've come to one of my boot camp classes before. So if you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll just start talk louder. But thanks again for inviting me to come talk to you guys tonight. It's just so humbling to me because there's so many of you in here that I look up to, and the fact that you asked me to come tonight was just a true blessing. Like, just preparing everything I had was healing for me. Just going through my story and trying to figure out what the biggest turning points were for me. So it's so amazing to look back on your life and see the ways that God has worked in it. He's always at work. Like, he knows everything. He put you even here tonight for a reason. I can look back and see that God was preparing me to talk to you tonight in so many ways. Just even the past week has been the most. And I know that he put you here tonight to prepare you for something too. So keep that in mind moving forward. One way he prepared me was through a sermon that I heard in my hometown. It's kind of my hometown. It's where I moved here from. It was a pastor at a church I used to go to over Thanksgiving. And he was talking about how God is always working below the surface. Even when things might look like a mess in our lives, he's always working below the surface. And he specifically referred to the Christmas story and how Joseph and Mary's story it's a pretty big mess. Like, you had a 19-year-old virgin that was pregnant in a no-name town, but God was fulfilling his prophecy through that mess. So I want to talk about my story today because it's a true example of this. My life was a complete mess on the surface, but God was working below the surface the whole time. I wasn't able to see God working below the surface until I made the choice to listen, to clear distractions, and live a simple life. I will specifically refer to the Christmas season and how we can make Jesus our number one focus. So as you listen to me share, I encourage you to see God working below the surface and not just listen to the mess above the surface. So I grew up in Fort Dodge, Iowa. My early childhood years were spent with my father. I was definitely daddy's little girl, and he would probably still call me that today. I spent as much time with him as I could. We did everything together. But I came home on the last day of first grade. My parents told my brother and I that they were going to be getting a divorce. My brother and I were going to live with my mom in a smaller town close by. And I was 6 or 7, so I wasn't really old enough to understand what this fully meant. So I just kind of said, okay, and I went along with it. Later on, I found out that my dad was making meth and selling it out of our garage. He eventually got caught and he ended up in prison, and he's still there today. And that was when I was in middle school. Since my dad wasn't around, my mom's uncle, who is my great uncle, he stepped in as our father figure. He bought us a car, he bought us a house to live in, and he made sure that we were taken care of. But during this time, he was sexually abusing me. I'm not sure when it started, but it ended when I started to mature and understand what was going on. My estimate is that it was going on for about 10 years, but mostly in my childhood, till about I was 12 or 13. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't think about telling my mom what happened. I thought about it every single day, but I was terrified. He did everything for us, so I didn't know what would happen to us if I told. I was also terrified no one would believe me, so I held it in. After my dad went to prison, a friend's mom invited me to attend church with them. This is where I discovered Jesus and the first time I heard about him. I decided to submit my life to him, and it went well, for a little while. From this moment on, a lot of things started to happen. I was growing up and I had choices to make about my life. I'm sure many of you in this room remember what it was like to be a teenager. It's confusing and it's challenging. So in the next part of my story, I had two paths to choose from. God kept putting those two paths in front of me, but I continually chose the wrong path. But eventually God led me to the right one. But don't worry, I haven't forgotten about Christmas. It's coming. This all ties in. So in high school, on the outside at least, it might have looked like I had it all together. I made the decision to live independently from my family. I had a job, I owned a car, and I worked as much as I could to support myself. I also discovered that I was a pretty good runner. I became really successful at cross country and track and made it to state every year throughout high school. I also continued to attend church and my church's youth group. But in the other half of my life, I had no role models at home. My brother battled mental illness, and he was physically abusing my mother and I. And my mom was also battling mental illness, and we constantly fought. My home life was completely broken, both emotionally and physically. I turned to alcohol and sex, but I tried my best to be a good person at the same time. I was leading my double life, and I wasn't listening to God. And leading a double life doesn't just stop. It follows you, and that was my choice. So when I entered college, my choice was to run from my problems. Literally. I ran cross country and track in college at Wartburg College in Iowa, which made me the first person to attend college in my family on both my mom and dad's side. I had good grades. I was an outstanding college athlete, becoming All-American and national champion, and the NCAA named me Athlete of the Year for Division III. So on paper, I might have looked pretty great, but I was literally running from my past. I met a guy and began dating him my freshman year, but I did not love him. He was just the first guy that was ever really nice to me. He treated me really well, so I settled. I didn't think that anyone would ever treat me that way again. So we got married after I graduated college, but I was still running from my past. I was structured by my athleticism, but I was actually falling completely apart. My marriage fell apart when I finally spoke about the abuse that I had experienced growing up. We divorced, and then I began an unhealthy relationship with someone else. All of this, and I was only 22 years old. When I look back on this time, I see a lost person. The kind of person who got in a horrible car accident. I moved 9 times in less than 2 years, and I was in a series of bad relationships. Everything just kept piling up. And to top it off, I eventually decided to tell my mom and brother about the abuse. And that fear that I long held on to, that they wouldn't believe me, became true. They both said I ruined our family, and even to this day they say that, and they don't believe me. So, as you can imagine, this ended our relationship. This is when I completely fell apart. I felt so alone, I was so depressed, I wasn't able to do anything. And on Thursday afternoon, November 18th, 2010, I went home for lunch, and I took over 500 prescription pills and washed them down with liquor. I lay down on the floor and I prayed to God that He would take me out of this hell I was living in. I just couldn't do it anymore. Only by a miracle, after I'd been there for 24 hours, my ex-boyfriend, who I hadn't talked to in over a month for some reason, he came to my apartment to see me. And he would have never even done that when we were together. He was a landlord. He had over 200 properties, and even if I asked him to come for lunch, he would have been too busy. So that in itself was just miraculous. He was the one who found me, he called 911, and he got me to the hospital. When I woke up, I was completely hysterical. I couldn't believe that it didn't work. I truly didn't want to be here. And I was so mad at God, just yelling at Him, I have nothing left, God. Why do you want me to be here and suffer? So after I attempted suicide, I had to spend some time in the psychiatric unit. And it's a place that you would, it's exactly what you'd picture. And it was quite the experience. And I kept thinking to myself, why am I here? These people are crazy. I'm not crazy. But then those crazies began looking at me like I was crazy. And that's because I had this huge gash from my forehead all the way down to my chin. So they're every time someone see me, they'd kind of do that. So I was likely an injury after my attempted suicide. I'm not sure how it happened. But I remember thinking that I would always have to see that scar. And I'd have to face everyone with what I'd done, and I'd have to remember it forever. But as you can see, I don't have any scars today. The gashes were large enough that there should be scars, but I don't have any, and I think I know why. While in the psychiatric unit the first night, I was completely terrified. I began having an extreme panic attack because I didn't know how I was going to go into the world again and face everything. Everything was already bad, and then I added this on top of it, and it didn't work. But I actually heard God's voice saying, "Trust me." And it was then, like that exact moment, I had this panic attack. He said, "Trust me." I completely submitted my life to him, and he transformed me right there. And from that moment on, I've been completely different. That was only 4 years ago, which is just crazy to say because that's not that long. Each day I heal a little bit more. And like I said, even just putting this down on paper and saying it out loud every time, I heal more. I experienced a peace unlike anything I ever had at that moment, and I still have that peace today. So after a decade of running and making the wrong decisions, I made the choice to finally listen and trust God, and he gave me the strength to begin to heal. First, I had a complete mess to deal with. Many people in my life were really angry at me. They couldn't believe that I would do such a thing. I had a $10,000 medical bill, and I hadn't shown up to work in over a week. So I had a lot of explaining to do. My dear friend that I consider family, her name is Terry. She lives back in Iowa. She made me go talk to her pastor at her church. The pastor connected me with another lady who became my mentor. Her name's Karen, and I began to meet with her weekly. It was so hard. It's not like I said, "I will trust you, God," and everything changed and it just became so easy. It was so hard. But he gave me the motivation to pursue because I finally had submitted everything to him. I began simplifying my life by clearing the clutter and the distractions. For me, it was men and busyness. I wasn't able to see God working below the surface until I did this. So it all began with this verse. Now I'll read it to you. It's 1 Peter 5, 6 through 11. "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Be alert and sober of mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in your faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kinds of sufferings. And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered for a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. To him be the power forever and ever. Amen." And that verse was my rock, and I still read it all the time, even today. Then I began keeping a gratitude journal. I wrote down 3 things I was grateful for each day, and then 1 thing I did for someone else each day. I joined women's Bible studies. I tried to be at church as much as possible. I was in the Bible every day. And then I made a contract with my friend Laura that said I wouldn't date anyone for an entire year, and she decided to do it with me. So we actually wrote out a contract and signed it together. So that was good to have that accountability. And I did it, which was really hard for me. But having been an athlete, it was also a struggle for me to have self-control or discipline without that structure of being in season or with training for something. So after I got out of the hospital, I knew I just wasn't quite ready to not have that structure. So why not do an Ironman? And if you don't know what an Ironman is, it's a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and a 26.2 mile run that you have to complete in 17 hours. Yeah, go big or go home, I guess. And I'd never even done a triathlon before that. So as you can imagine, this took a lot of time to train for. It was that entire year. So I said that Jesus and Ironman were my boyfriends that year. I coached myself and I trained alone 90% of the time. Sometimes I'd have friends that would join me for just parts of my bike rides or my running. I did 100-mile bike rides alone. I spent hours in the pool alone. I'd go on 20-mile runs alone. And I didn't even take any music either. And it was during this time that I began to face my demons that I had bottled up for 25 years. The mental struggles I went through made the physical struggles seem like nothing. So with God's help, he slowly began to heal me literally every step of the way. And I did complete the Ironman, and it was just an amazing moment because when I crossed that finish line, it wasn't like, yay, I did an Ironman. It was, I'm alive, and I overcame, and I'm okay. So because I slowed down, minus doing an Ironman, but it actually was slow, it's a long, steady race, and I cleared out the clutter, I was able to see God working below the surface. He showed me so many things that year. All the hard work, all the tears led me to something beautiful. So in February 2012, I met my wonderful husband, Nate Wiley, through a mutual friend. He was living in Madison while I was still living in Iowa. We kept ending up in the same places at the same time because we had a similar group of friends. I ended up getting a job in Madison, and Nate and I started dating. And on our first date, we rode our bikes downtown to the Capitol, to the farmer's market. And he just happened to be wearing a bike jersey that looked like a tuxedo. So we took a picture together, and it kind of looks like we're at the Capitol getting married. So Nate wasn't actually a Christian while we were dating, but God did me a huge favor, and he became a Christian 2 weeks before our wedding. And we rode our bikes. We rode a tandem bike down to the Capitol, just like we did on our first date. And Pastor Nick married us, so we had a beautiful, small Christian wedding. And both of us believe that a simple life is a happy life. So together we've made the decision to live as simple as possible. For us, this means living with less and clearing distractions. We work hard to remove physical clutter, but we also work hard to remove the mental clutter as well. So if you come to our house, you'll see that we don't have many things, we don't have many decorations or clutter. And we constantly get reactions like, it's so calm in here when people come over. We only have one car, we bike everywhere, and I did not bike here tonight in my heels. We keep our clothing minimal. We kind of have it set up like a wardrobe, so it's just really easy to pick things in the morning. We have a garden, and we did have chickens. We had to sell them because we're moving so that we could grow our own food. And these are just examples, but again, we try to live our life as simple as possible. We're committed to this simplicity to free ourselves from distractions. Because we have more time, we're able to spend more time with God and with others, the two most important things in this life. Because we have more money, we're also able to give more to others as well. Living this simple life, we're not the people that say, I'm so busy, but busy is good. And especially at this time of year, during the holidays, I see it all around me, and I'm sure you do too. I've been hearing so many friends and family say, I have so much to do before Christmas. It's such a stressful time of year. And just a show of hands, how many of you have already said that this year? Don't lie. And I love Christmas, and I'm super excited for the season. And because of the way that Nate and I live, it trickles into what we do during Christmas too. So we're able to really focus on God and others and enjoy this time. So our Christmas looks like this. We put up a minimal amount of decorations. We just have a small tree. We don't send out Christmas cards, but instead we send out cards and handwritten letters to our friends throughout the year. We don't buy gifts, but instead we surprise each other and our friends and family throughout the year with gifts, just when they're not expecting it. We don't try to attend every party, but instead we just choose one or two to go to. And we learn to say no. That's the biggest thing. So for us, Christmas is really relaxing. It's not much different than the rest of the year. But I'm not saying these traditions at Christmas are bad. I absolutely love them. I'm glad people do them. But all the tasks that you think you have to do, you really don't. You choose to do them. And it's very understandable because we have so much social pressure to put these expectations on ourselves, especially as women, not just at Christmas, but always. But the Bible says, I have another verse for you here. It's 1 John 2:15 through 17. Do not love this world nor the things it offers you. For when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you. For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, and pride in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but they are from the world. And the world is fading away, along with everything that you crave. But anyone who does what pleases God will live forever. So that verse was something that came up in my reading just a couple weeks ago, and it really hit me that that's just a great verse to be reminded of, especially right now, but anytime that we're busy, because there are so much social pressures on us. But you can answer this. Do you think that Jesus wants us to choose to celebrate Christmas in this stressful way? Probably not. Do you think Jesus is trying to show you something below the surface of the distractions, the pressures, and the busyness? And if you won't know if you don't stop to listen. And you can answer this one too. If Jesus were here right now, what do you think he would give us as his gift? Like if he was not like the baby savior. If he was a person here right now, what do you think he would give us as a gift?
A hug.
A hug?
Time.
Attention, time,
Love.
love,
Peace.
peace.
Peaceful heart.
What's that?
Peaceful heart.
A peaceful heart. Yeah, I think so too. I think he would give his time to us. I think he would do something nice for us. I think he would spend time praying for the people that he cares about. So my intent isn't to make you feel guilty for what you do at Christmas time or pity for what I've been through, but just to make you aware. We must be intentional at Christmas and always. If we are just doing things because we feel like we have to, they will most likely become unenjoyable. If we're always running from one task to the next or running away from what God's trying to show us below the surface, we'll miss out on the healing and growth that comes from God. I'm not saying we don't have to do all the things we think that we do, or I'm also saying that we don't have to do all the things we think we need to do at Christmas time or any other day. And by accepting this and setting realistic expectations for ourselves, we can come to a place where life begins to look a little simpler. So with that said, it's not going to change overnight or even in one Christmas season. If you've always been the house on the block to deck your house out in lights and you don't do it one year, people are probably going to ask you questions. You'll definitely have to face these things. I know I had to when we made the decision not to do gifts, and that gives you the opportunity and opens the door to explain why you don't, and our answer always is tied back to Jesus, so it leads into some pretty great conversations. And people eventually stop asking questions. So I guess my suggestion is that if you are the person that is doing so many things, maybe you take away one each year, or another thing you can do is focus on one thing each year. So maybe one year you spend all your energy decorating your house and putting the lights up, and you don't put as much energy into buying gifts, and maybe you get everyone a gift card. And then the next year you spend all your energy trying to find something really neat for everybody and don't decorate your house as much. So you don't have to do everything you think you need to do. And maybe you send out Christmas cards every other year, or do like Nate and I do and do it throughout the year. Maybe you have your holiday party every other year instead of every year. The goal is to balance Christmas time so you can get back to enjoying each tradition instead of stressing about it. So that's going to look different for everyone. Maybe you are a person that you truly enjoy and are excited and not stressed at all about all those things you're doing, and you're baking cookies and shooting geese and and that's great. I wish I could do that. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is, am I spending more time being stressed, worrying, and thinking about my to-do list, or am I spending more time thinking about Jesus and others? Jesus' number one command to us. So we can ask ourselves that now at Christmas time, but each and every day. So how can we be intentional at Christmas? I have a very effective way to do this, and it's to write it down. I practice this with my personal training clients, and I also do it at home. My husband and I set an intention for each week, and we write a word on a piece of paper. We put it somewhere that we can see. That way we're reminded of how we wanted to go about that week. So tonight there's Post-it notes. There's just a pad at each table. So if you can rip off a sheet of paper and grab a pen, just take a moment to think about what your intention is for this holiday season. And it might be more than one word, but sum that intention up into one word and write it on that Post-it note. So when you go home tonight, you can take that Post-it note and put it somewhere that you're going to see it. Okay, I'll put it on the door going out the house, or on the fridge, or on my mirror. Those are some pretty common areas. So I'll give you a minute just to do that, and then I'll wrap it up here. I heard focus. That's a good one. I use that word a lot.
Family.
Yeah. That's a good one too. Does anyone else have their word they want to share? Diligent? Generosity?
Space.
Space? That's a good one. I've never heard that as a word. Cool. What's that?
Thanks.
Thanks. That's a good one too. All right, so take your Post-it notes home with you. You don't have to show anyone if you don't want to, but you are free to. And like I said, put it somewhere that you can see it every day throughout the Christmas season, and use it to remind yourself of what your intention is going into the holiday. And definitely you can do it when it's not Christmas too, if you want to take that throughout the rest of the year. So as you heard, Nate and I are moving to the Netherlands at the end of January. And he was offered to go there for 2 years through Epic. And we plan to continue our simple lifestyle, which, as I hear in Europe, I think they're pretty on board with that. I'm looking forward to experiencing their simplicity and their culture and being able to bring some of that back with us. I'm sure they do things that we don't do that we can learn from. So it's apparent that God was working below the surface in many areas of my life. I only shared a tiny bit of my story to you. God has done so much more than I was able to tell you tonight. I actually plan on writing a memoir while we are in the Netherlands because there's so much to be said about how amazing God is. So I'll let you know when it's done.
Yay.
So I could make many points from my story, but tonight the point I want to reiterate is God is amazing. And that God is always working below the surface. Even when above the surface, it looks so messy. The only way that we can see this is by clearing the distractions and the busyness and making the choice to spend time with God and with other Christians. Not only at Christmas time, but every single day. He is the only reason I'm alive today. He's the only reason I don't have a mental illness. And he's the only reason that I'm joyful and grateful every single day. So this story isn't really my story, it's God's story. Thank you.
How amazing is that? I just love it. Thank you so much for sharing your lesson.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, indeed.
I'll put my-
Charity, now you can put your shoes back on and we'll see.
Aren't these great?
Oh, I'm sorry, at my age, that's torture.
It's still torture. Awesome.